Hi again and welcome to the TalkingBass podcast. This week Ellen is sitting down to talk bass with a UK session bass player who has played with literally every famous musical act you can think of. As bass player for Jools Holland and all his many TV shows here in the UK over a period of 30 years, Dave has been fortunate to play with hundreds and hundreds of brilliant artists, including everyone from Jarreau to Tom Jones, Amy Winehouse, Eric Clapton, Paul Simon, Chaka Khan, and the list just goes on and on and on. In this interview, Dave gives us an incredible insight into the requirements for playing with such a diverse array of artists while under the pressures of live television and recording. He also talks at length about the steps he took during his long professional career that eventually led to securing such a great gig. So let's join Ellen as she sits down to talk bass with the incredibly cool Dave Swift.
Hello and welcome to the TalkingBass podcast with me, your host Ellen O'Reilly, and my guest today is the immeasurable Mr. Dave Swift.
Hello.
Hey Dave, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well indeed. How about you?
I'm alright now that I'm doing this podcast. It is a lifesaver. Thank you, Mark Smith at TalkingBass.
Indeed.
Yeah, so I mean basically I kind of like to go right back to the beginning with people. And what was it? I mean, okay, so you were influenced by your two big brothers were musicians as well, right?
Well, they played guitar at home, and they were big music fans. They had, certain records they always listened to, but they were never professional or semi-professional. It was just a fun hobby for them, really. But even so, I was probably the only kid that I knew of who had family members who had musical instruments in the house.
Were your parents musical as well?
They didn't play any instruments, but they definitely loved music. My memory of a kid was that we watched a lot of TV back in the 70s, an awful lot of TV. And they did enjoy a lot of musicals, those early MGM, Judy Garland. Mm-hmm. There was always like musicals on in the house, and they both liked music. Mom had a really nice singing voice as well. And I think the first film I ever saw at the cinema, my mom took me to see, ironically, The Sound of Music. It was the first movie I ever saw at the cinema, so she took me there when I was a little kid, and I still love that film.
Awesome. Well, you're building your own Von Trapp family there now, so...
Slowly but surely.
Brilliant. And so you were like age 14 when... What was it about the bass then? The
thing is, the bass was one of the last things that happened to me, because I sang in the school choir. I had apparently quite a good voice, so I always got picked to sing in the choir. So that was music for me very, very early on. And then I joined the local church choir, mainly because the vicar caught me and a friend of mine throwing bricks at the church. When I say bricks, I'm talking little tiny pebbles, and we weren't trying to do any damage, we were just bored. And of course, he grabbed us by our ears and sort of said, how about joining the choir and keeping yourself occupied? So I joined the church choir when I was about 10 in 1974. And I stayed in that choir for 9 years. So I was singing music and actually singing bass parts, because I started off as a treble, went to alto and straight to bass. So I was ironically singing bass parts years before I ended up playing them. So, but the choir was a great training ground for me, even though I wasn't aware of it. I was doing it just because I loved music and I loved singing. I didn't realize how important it was going to be to me later on. So then when I went to secondary school, I wasn't playing an instrument, and I tried my brother's guitars and never bonded with them. So I went to the secondary school and I wanted to play the saxophone, because I'd seen saxophones on Top of the Pops and I thought that looks pretty cool. The school didn't have one. So the next thing I saw was a trombone, and I thought, wow, that looks really cool. It looks quite different to everything else. They gave the trombone to another kid, gave me a euphonium, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, how have I got to this? I wanted to be a sax player. So as much as I liked the idea of playing an instrument, I gave it up quite quickly. And that was it for music. For me, it came to an end pretty quickly when I was like 12. And it wasn't until I was 14 that I took up the trombone properly. The school found me one. I decided, okay, I want to play this instrument. There was a great trombone teacher at school who's still with us. His name's Phil Johnson. I recently linked up with him. So I started to play trombone. I couldn't read music. So the trombone is where my early training came from. That's how I learned to read music. That's how I understood about different clefs and key signatures and what have you. So that the trombone was a key thing. And then about a year later, when I was 15, some friends were forming their own band, and it was an offshoot of the school wind band. So we had a very odd lineup with clarinets and trumpets, and I was on trombone. There was another trombone. So there was no bass player. Nobody, played one. Nobody wanted to. And I think because I played my brother's guitars a little bit, I just went, I'll give it a go. So that it was kind of by default, really, and and the bass kind of chose me. It was out of necessity. So I went with my older brother to the town centre in Wolverhampton, where I'm from, and we picked the bass off the wall. It was a K Fender Precision copy that weighed more than the sun, but that was it. That was the start of it. So I was 14, and the great thing is because I could already read music. I already had a good understanding of not necessarily harmony, but definitely reading and all that other, the general theory. So all I had to do then was to acquire the skills on bass guitar and transfer all of that knowledge. So I started to play bass guitar when I was 15. I was still at school, but I was self-taught. There were no bass tutors. And then my trombone teacher said to me, he said, look, if you want to do this for a living, he said, you should take up double bass as well. And this was shortly afterwards. There was only like a month after I took up bass guitar, and it was the best advice anyone's ever given me. So I bought a double bass. So I was playing trombone, bass guitar, and double bass while I was still at school. But I was teaching myself bass. There were no tutors at all. So bass found me, really. It came knocking at my door.
Oh, cool. All right. Okay, so and then you moved to London. How old were you then?
Well, I'd already been a pro. So I left school at 16. And I turned professional at 17. So I was doing gigs at 16, but I wasn't professional. Turned professional at 17. And then I did a lot of work on cruise ships. I did about 4 different cruise ships, and it was great. We traveled all over the world, playing in different bands, every type of music you could imagine. But then, and earning a really good living. And I was a session musician as well. I was still doing all the regular, and back then there was a lot of session work, and that was still in my hometown of Wolverhampton and in the West Midlands. But I just decided I wanted to do something more creative. I wanted to play with more creative musicians. I wanted to play more improvised music. And I also wanted to study as well, because I didn't study music as an academic subject at school. My only musical knowledge came from studying the trombone. So there was a lot of gaps in my music education. And I wrote off to go to Berklee School of Music at the time. I wanted to do some serious study, but it was way too expensive. This was in 1988. It was way too expensive. So I just decided the next best thing is to move to London permanently and then start studying with some prominent teachers and players, and then try and establish myself from scratch all over again as but not so much as a session player, but more of a jazz improvising musician. That was the main reason for coming to London, because I didn't want to do all the things I'd already done in the past, because I'd done theatre work, I'd done a lot of stuff where I was having to read music all the time, and I wanted to avoid doing that. So when I came to London, I deliberately said no to a lot of those gigs, and which was, it seems crazy now because I was turning down a lot of work and a lot of money, but I guess I wanted to suffer for my art. And suffer I did.
And who were those players that you mentioned that you were taught by in London?
Well, there was a couple. I mean, they were predominantly double bass players, because there was very specific things about the double bass. Because, it's a more challenging instrument. There's a lot more to know about it. So there was a great British jazz double bass player called Jeff Klein, sadly no longer with us, but he played on a lot of jazz recordings, a lot of TV themes. And I studied with him. And there was a fantastic American double bass player who's still with us, I believe, called Michael Moore. And he was living in London at the time. And his last gig was playing with Dave Brubeck. So that's the caliber of Michael Moore. And he was an amazing double bass player, very, very lyrical, great solos. And when I was studying with him, he he encouraged me to take up some piano as well, which I think is a very good point. You know, there's a lot of, I think if you don't already, if you're not a piano player, whatever instrument you should play, you should have some piano skills. I think it's really useful. And I don't mean actually being able to sort of play it, but I just mean with the understanding of harmony and theory, the piano is a great instrument for that. And that's why Michael encouraged me to do it. And he gave me a little keyboard, and I used to, you know, practice chords and record them and play along with them. So I was kind of studying improvisation with them more than anything else. But yeah, so that was pretty special studying with him. But I always say to people these days, if you're looking for work, if you're trying to establish yourself, sometimes it's quite good to do that, to study with a prominent player or teacher, particularly someone who's got lots of gigs, because you know you can't just go up to people after a gig and just say, "Wow, I loved you playing. Give us some work, give us some gigs," because it's not going to go down well, you know. And also, if you cold call them too, and you just phone someone up and say, "Love your work, got any gigs?" It's never a good thing. But if you find some people who you quite admire and you think could help you, then if you go for a lesson with them, what you're actually doing, you're getting more than a lesson, you're getting an audition with the player. The player is getting to know you as a person, is getting to hear you play and what you can and what you can't do. And then there is a chance that whoever's teaching you will remember you in the future and say, choose this guy, you know. So I do encourage, and that's what I did as well. I wanted to study, but I just thought, you know, by encountering these people, and that's what happened. You know, I did get recommended for work by these folks, and that would have never happened if I'd have just called them up cold and say, "Get a gig."
Yeah. Actually, I've got a question specifically from Mark, because he spent a lot of time on ships, and because you're in that situation where, you know, you're playing the whole time and you're playing all kinds of music consistently, he wanted to know how did that benefit your overall employability as a musician? Like, how did it improve your versatility?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is the key thing, because on a cruise ship, and especially if you were a reading musician, because not everyone reads that goes on there, but as a reading musician, you get called to play in every imaginable band on there. So I was playing in dance bands, you know, kind of funk. Sorry, did I just swear? Can we cut
It's
that?
all right. I swear all the time. It's grand. Mark knows what he's getting when he gets me, you know.
Oh, sorry about that. I've never done that before. Yes, if it was like, you know, there were bands in the nightclub, you know, playing more kind of funk, sort of soul groove stuff, you know. So and even then there were charts. That's the thing back then. A lot of people had, even the pop stuff was written down. Like these days, it's very rare to get that. If you're playing in pop situations, you're just expected to have this amazing repertoire and know all these songs. But back then, everything was written down. So yeah, and I was moving from one room in the ship to different areas, playing different kinds of music, you know. So I think for me, the thing was, back then, my reading skills were better than my listening skills were, you know. So I was very good at sight reading stuff, but I didn't have that repertoire because I wasn't learning songs by ear. I was just reading them off a chart. So that's one of the things I realized on the ship. When I moved to London, I needed to do more stuff where there's no written music. I needed to develop my ears way more, because that was definitely lacking. Again, when I was a trombonist as well, from day one, you get a book put in front of you. You get a method book. And you know, so the teacher doesn't say, okay, just play whatever you feel like. It's play what's on the page. It was the way it was done. So I'd been very blinkered like that. I'd sort of thought, if it's written on the page, I'm fine. But if it's not, then that's a problem. So it took me longer then to let go of the reading side of it and embrace using my ears. So the ship taught me a big lesson there. I just kind of thought, this is fine while I'm on here, but as soon as I come off this, people are going to expect me to do stuff. And they're just going to want me to know X amount of songs in my head.
Right, so was that quite scary then, going from being a primarily reading musician, you know? I mean, you wanted to develop your improvisational skills, but you went straight into jazz. You know what I mean? So you didn't just go in, oh, I'll do a couple of those kind of gigs and build that up. You just went straight for jazz, which is all improv.
Yeah, I mean, I'd had a couple of books, that I'd done a little bit of studying from, but yeah, I just thought the only way this is going to work is jump in the deep end. I had to put myself in that position. And I've always said this, for me, the best lessons that I've learned have been under the most awkward, uncomfortable circumstances. This for me is when you really kind of grow, you put on the spot. So I was playing in big bands, playing jazz orchestrations. But sometimes the band leader would call the rhythm section and the featured soloist to the front, and you'd have to and the soloist would call out a standard. And I'm just kind of going, glue, So this is in my teens, and I just thought, wow. So not only have I got to have this reading thing together, I've got to learn hundreds and thousands of songs, and no one told me that. I discovered that on the bandstand. So when I moved to London, I was just taking gigs with people that I'd never played with before, and I was playing songs I hadn't played with. I mean, luckily I had the real book at the time. Now, originally that was called the Fate Book. I bought my first one when I was on the QE2. I bought it from Manny's Music in New York, and it was illegal. You had to buy it in a brown paper bag. And they had to sell it to you under the counter. It literally was that conspicuous. So on the early gigs when I moved to London, I was cheating a little because I was using the real book, which a lot of people have. But I quickly realised, working with more accomplished jazz musicians, they didn't have these. I was the only one that was using this book, and I'm thinking, this isn't great. It doesn't look good. It's not making me play as freely and as creatively. So I quickly realized that I had to ditch the real book, and I had to just listen. I had to listen to a lot of recordings. I did a lot of transcriptions of bass players, bass lines, solos. So yeah, it was baptism by fire. It was quite daunting because I'd gotten very comfortable earning a great living from just reading music, written notation. I mean, for instance, when I was on the cruise ships, we were playing lots of Lionel Richie songs and lots of Al Jarreau stuff. And the irony is I got to play with those guys all those years later. But at the time, I was just reading the bass lines off a pre-written chart. So I wasn't listening to the songs. I was just trusting who'd ever done the transcription. And I just kind of thought, well, this is easy because I can sight read it like this. If I'd have had to learn it at the time, it would have taken time. But all those years later, I realized, of course you've got to listen to the song. It's the most important thing. You've got to go to the source. So it was great when I got to play with these artists later on, and I actually really got to listen to the recordings and what the bass player is doing, as opposed to just reading a transcription that someone had given me. So
yeah. Also, sometimes you find those transcriptions, some are wrong, So you're playing the...
Some of them are very, very wrong. And even some of the better ones are still wrong. So, there's a lot of commercially available transcriptions out there, and I've bought them. And sometimes they're good for reference. They're a good reference point. But I always say to people, the best thing is to do your own. The hard work is its own reward, because, again, if you're using someone else's transcriptions, you don't know how accurate that is. You don't know how conscientious that person was. You don't know how much time they spent on it. Were they just thinking of the money? Let's get these out quickly. I mean, for me, I do transcriptions all the time, and I'll spend like half an hour on one bar of music, to try and get it, if it's particularly complicated, just to get it spot on, So there's an American bass player, jazz player called Todd Coolman, and he's got a book called, I think it's called The Bass Tradition, and it's all transcriptions of fantastic jazz bass lines and solos. In chronological order, from the very early days of Jimmy Blanton, Ray Brown, Oscar Pettiford, going right through to Stanley Clarke, all the modern day guys, really complex transcriptions. And apparently he attended some bass convention once, or he did a bass class clinic, and he held up his own book, and he held it up to the class, and he said, "Please don't buy this book," which is kind of, it's a very brave thing because he wants to make some money. But what he was saying is, don't just take, for granted that this, in other words, you should do your own. You should do your own transcriptions, because that's where the benefit is, not just reading someone else's. If you do your own, you get inside the play, you get inside their style, you get to hear all the little nuances of their playing if you do your own transcriptions. But if you're just reading somebody else's, you don't get that. And at worst, the worst case scenario is you're playing something that's completely wrong that has been transcribed badly. So I'm a great advocate in doing your own transcriptions.
Now, most people would kind of come the other way around. Like, they've learned by ear and they do everything by ear, and then later on they come to sight reading, like me. I would be one of them. What would be your you're the complete opposite, so what would be your advice for people who are the complete opposite way?
Well, the thing is, I have to say, in my experience, some people don't want to hear that advice. I've encountered a number of musicians that I've worked with for a long time, and they don't read at all. They haven't got a great knowledge of harmony and theory, but they've learned to play by ear, listening to the radio. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, some of them just don't want to. They don't want to do it. They're happy with where they are. I'm a little surprised, because why would you not want to be as versatile as possible? But then again, I suppose with a lot of these players, the gigs that they're known to be doing and the gigs they prefer to be doing, if they're not getting called to read very often, then they think to themselves, well, why spend all that time doing something that I'm never likely to use? So there is that as well. But I mean, I always encourage anyone who is just a player who plays by ear. I definitely encourage them to, in whatever way possible, to learn to read music, even on a very basic level, but also have an understanding of harmony and theory as well. I think that even if it's just small snippets of just something, and it's the same with the opposite with people who can only read music. They can only read what's written on the page. I would definitely encourage them to learn to improvise, learn to play by ear, busk, just learn songs in their head. I think you've both parties have got to do, if you want to be, it depends on how versatile you want to be. I mean, for instance, in Jools Holland's band, it's interesting, the mixture of characters there, because there's only myself and the horn section that can read written notation. A lot of the guys in the horn section went to college. They went to music college, university. I mean, I didn't, but I learned from playing the trombone. But the rest of the rhythm section in Jools' band, so drums, piano, guitar, and organ, those guys don't read. So, but look, we're all in the same band. We're all doing the same gigs. So, music's a great leveler, really. That's the most important thing at the end of the day. Can you all come together, and can you all, do the same thing and make a good sound, and so it's not obvious that somebody's trained and somebody isn't. But I think that's what happens. I think the people who don't read music, come from that kind of background, then their ears tend to be better developed, because from day one they've had to depend on them. I mean, before I got the Jools gig, the previous bass player was Pino Palladino. It was Pino's very first gig when he moved to London. He got a gig with Jools. The band was called, I think, Jools Holland and His Millionaires. Now, from what I know of, I don't know more recently, but Pino and I used to be neighbours here in South East London. We used to live right next to each other, practically. And I'm pretty sure that for the first however many years, Pino didn't read a note of music. But for that reason, your ears then have got to be this big. So in other words, it was probably as easy for Pino to listen to a piece of music and to be able to play it pretty quickly as it was for me to have a sheet of music and for me to sight read it. His ears that developed. But then, if you're in situations where you're not called to do it, or it's not that important, then, I would never sort of force anyone into saying you must learn to read at all. But I think it's of great benefit if people who play by ear learn to read or understand theory a bit more. But I'm not sure what the best way of doing that is. I don't know if there's any online stuff, or whether there is specific teachers. I'm sure there are, just to learn how to read. But for me, I didn't really have a choice, because from day one, the reading thing was it. That's what I had to do. So, and it's kind of nice, because people often say it's good to get that out the way early on. A lot of people say they find it more difficult to learn to read music when they're older.
Yep.
So for me, I got that out of the way when I was at school, and then the rest of it was just developing my ears.
So you were saying about the band. So half you are from like a reading trained background, the other half not so much. So like, how do you learn the songs then together? Are you given,
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Jools gig was a big shift for me, because when I got the gig in 1991, I'm the only person that auditioned for the Jools gig. Nobody else auditioned for it. Everyone else got the gig by word of mouth. But because Jools had Pino and he was used to that level of excellence, Jools wasn't prepared to take me on with the recommendation of one of the sax players. He had to hear me first. And specifically, the gig was on upright. Jools didn't want me to play electric bass at all. It was all double bass. So, but from day one, he just gave me a carrier bag of cassette tapes and just said, "This is the material. Go and learn it." And it was just so daunting seeing this big bag of tapes and with songs on it. But what I've always done, and I still do it to this day, I transcribe everything. As soon as I get a recording, whether it's stuff for the TV show or the radio show, we get emailed a recording by the BBC, and the first thing I do is meticulously transcribe the bass part. I mean, if it's a very basic blues and the bass part is quite generic and it's not very specific, then I won't go that far. But if it's anything where the bass part is fairly elaborate or it's crucial to the recording, then that's important for me to have it all written down. So, and I've got thousands of transcriptions from when I started the Jools, literally thousands of them. And then they're nice souvenirs as well, and they're all handwritten. It's manuscript with a pencil, and I write the artist on there and the dates. But yeah, that's my starting point. Now, then once that's out of the way, and it is time consuming. It is time consuming. But as I said, transcriptions, the hard work has its own reward. Because you really, So, and I think some of the other people that I work with, they will tend to listen to the songs in a very casual way. In other words, driving the car or in the bath, perhaps. And I will do that as well, but I'll do that towards the end. The first thing for me is the transcription, because I want to get every little nuance that the bass player is playing. If he plays a mistake, I want to hear it. I want to note it down. It's just the way I am. I'm just very pedantic about that, And the reason why I do it is a lot of the artists that we work for, the way I look at it is this. If I just listen to a song and I just kind of think, do you know what, that's close enough. And then you get to the BBC and you're playing with an artist like Chaka Khan, say, for instance, who we've been fortunate enough to play with a few times. And I'm just kind of playing Ain't Nobody or I'm Every Woman, and it's an approximation of it. And she knows bass, she loves bass players and she can hear bass very well. And if she then comes up to me and says, that's very nice, but that's not what's on the record, then that's a real problem for me, because I will then have to scurry away somewhere and then do the work. Whereas to me, if I get the hard work out the way at the beginning, then everything else is fine. So yeah, I'll transcribe it and I'll play it loads and loads of times. It's repetition, and I'll play it really slowly without the recording to begin with, because some of the fingerings are tricky for certain things, and I really play it out of time to begin with. Really slow, just so I can get all the notes under my fingers. Sometimes I'll still even write fingerings on certain passages to help. But and then I'll start to play with the metronome again, very, very slowly, and I'll speed it up. And again, it depends on how intricate it is. I'm talking about the more elaborate, tricky stuff, But then start playing along with the recordings itself, and I'll just play along with them as often as I can before the show comes up. So it is just repetition, but it always starts with the transcription. having said that, in the early days of the Jools' radio show, we got told who the guest was, but we didn't get told what the song was until the guest arrived at the studio.
Right.
Which was completely insane. I'm just thinking a little heads up, perhaps. And this was in the early days, so it was Jools' BBC Radio 2 show. So we had loads of times where people like Amy Winehouse would come in, and we knew she was going to be coming there, and we said, well, what do you want to do? And sometimes the artist would want to do a cover of something, sometimes they'd want to do one of their own tracks. But this one time she wanted to do Love is a Losing Game, I think it was. Now, we'd kind of all heard it on the radio in passing, but none of us really knew it. We never played it. So we had to sit while her manager or whatever put it on in the control room. And while she's sitting there watching us, we had to learn it in front of her. And the thing is, you've only got, at best, two run-throughs of it. You've got to listen to, and preferably on the first run-through, you need to be able to play that immediately with her. But any more than two run-throughs, and it's not cool. Because then that becomes a problem, because then time's ticking and she's getting bored. And it wasn't just Amy. This happened with a lot of people. We weren't told what the songs were. So it was a roast. It was a huge, huge roast for us. But you know what? What better training could you have to be put on the spot like that? Playing with, same with, happened with Adele. We didn't get told. We did, and sometimes even they didn't know what they wanted to do. So it was really tough, but it was the best training in the world, because everyone's ears just went.
Yeah.
They grew this big. But as time went on, we just said, look, how about as we're getting older, can you give us a bit of a break? So we said to the BBC, can you at least send us the track the night before? Just to give us a bit of time, and then we could make sketches. But yeah, in those early days, we had to learn stuff on the spot in front of the artist, and then we had to be able to play it 5 minutes later.
Oh my God. Tough. The pressure. When you were saying about all your transcriptions there from the Jools Holland show, that sounds like an amazing book that you should be releasing.
A lot of people have said this to me. They've said you should definitely do it. And the great thing is that I've tried to. Anyone who's been annoyed by me on Facebook and other social media platforms with my pictures of me with the artist I played with. Sorry about that, folks. But it is. People say, do you not have an autograph book? And I've never done that, because the fact is, if you're working with these, a lot of them are really iconic artists. It's not ideal going up to them with an autograph book, and even if you're big fans of theirs. So I've always just gone for the photograph. I said, do you mind if we have a photograph taken? So a lot of people have said to me, with all your transcriptions and all the photographs, this would make a great book, because you could utilize both, and then any anecdotes you've got from the actual experience, you can add that in as well. So yeah, it's something that I would definitely consider. It's strange though, because with my transcriptions, because they're handwritten, they're all pencil on manuscript, and some of them are neater than others. Some of them are a bit messy. Some of them were done quite rushed, and I think because they're such personal things. I've always been concerned about putting them out there, because a lot of people who do them now, they've all been done on a computer, and they're all very impersonal, and they're all very neat and tidy. And I don't know, I was just concerned if I put it out there, people are going to say, "Oh, he's a bit messy, isn't he?" His transcriptions are a little bit messy, but
well, what you could do is you could put them all into Sibelius and have them all neat and tidy, and then just have like an example page of the original with a photograph.
Sure.
Besides, photographs are better than our autographs anyway. Nobody
cares
with autographs,
I mean, the thing is, the transcriptions, they're all readable. It's not as though they're so bad, but it's just that some people. I wouldn't want people looking at my handwriting. I hate my own handwriting. It's not very nice at all, So I guess it's the same thing. It's quite personal. I said to Lucy, maybe after I'm gone, you can do it. You can get all the transcriptions and the photograph. I'll just leave some anecdotes for you, and you can do the book.
I'll do it. And if it starts coming out sounding too Irish, it's like, right, Ellen's just gone on her own now. Then I got locked with Amy. It was great. No, that didn't happen. So after you were playing with all the jazz bands in London, this is after you left Wolverhampton, you're in London, you're playing with all the jazz bands, you're expanding as a fly-by-ear kind of guy, and then all the TV work starts creeping in. So how did that all come about? Like, what was your story there?
Okay, well, I mean, bearing in mind that I knew about Jools from, well, first of all, being in Squeeze, the pop band he was in, because I was a big Squeeze fan. I used to buy all their singles. And I was aware of him from being on the Tube with Paulie Yates. In fact, we were watching something on it the other night. So I used to watch that. And that's how I learned to play bass, because I used to watch the Tube, and I used to watch all the bass players on there, see what they were doing. So that was an important thing for me. So when I moved to London, and I was already working with a saxophone player who got the Jools gig. Now, when I say got the Jools gig, this was Jools had left Squeeze for the final and last time, and he was trying to go out there as a solo artist, you know, and he wanted to play more jazz, R&B, blues stuff. So he only got a small band at the time. I think it was a 9-piece. It was 5-piece rhythm section and 4 horns. So it wasn't the band that it is now. And I'd lost track of him after he did the Tube with Paulie Yates. I didn't hear from him until I started to do jazz gigs with this sax player who got the gig. And then he came along to me one day and said, "Look, Pino has gone off," because everyone wanted Pino at the time, and so Jools needed to replace him. But again, this time he wanted an upright player. So I did the audition. And I remember at the end of it, Jools said to me, he said, "That's great. I love you playing, but we've got a lot of people to see," which I thought meant you haven't got it. But on the same day, he went outside to have a chat with the guitarist and came back and said, "The gig's yours." So I got it there and then on the spot. But this was 1991. Okay, so that first year, it was just really low key gigs. They were like festivals, summer balls, college gigs, all very low key, very small venues, whatever. And I just thought, this is great. I'd never really been in a band before. You know, I'd been a session musician really, and then in London I was just playing jazz with whoever. But this is the first time I'd ever been in a band, and I'm in my late 20s now. So, and that was it. And I just thought, this is great. You know, we do lots of traveling, we're having a lot of fun. Had no idea of what was coming afterwards. Had no comprehension at all. So in 1992, the following year, Jools got called and was asked if he'd like to present this new TV show called Late. I think it was called The Late Show to begin with, or it might just have been called Later. I can't remember, but it wasn't. He didn't have his name attached to it at the beginning, and that started in '92. And yeah, we like within a week, we're getting phone calls saying, you know, can you come and play with John Prine on here and Mary Chapin Carpenter? They're all these. Actually, the first bunch were all great country stars, bizarrely. And do you remember Charles and Eddie? There was those two guys. They had a big hit at the time. So, and it was just the weirdest thing sitting at home getting these phone calls, being asked to come in and play with these very famous people. And I'd not done that before. I'd not been on TV before. So it was quite a shock to the system. But then this was it. That was my job now. This is what I had to do. And then, so that sort of went on. And then the following year in '93, the Hootenanny, the New Year's Eve TV show came into play. And that was an even bigger roast, because on that, as you know, on that show, we don't just play with one person, we play with a ton of people. So that's hard work. So yeah, that was in the first 2 years of me getting the gig. It's just my head was just exploded, you know, because none of us saw that coming. And I think it was probably more difficult for the non-readers, because some people were coming in with arrangements and charts. And for me and the readers, it was, this is great. Straight away, we could sight read all this stuff. But when stuff was being given out to non-readers, it was more difficult for them. I think it was more of a shock for them. The worst thing about that, but again, the Jools gig and the TV stuff, was my sense of dress at the time. because I'd never been on TV before. And like now, I do try and dress as smartly as I can, a suit or a shirt, whatever. But back then, I was just putting any old T-shirt I found in the drawer, any old pair of jeans. And I look at some of those early clips. There's one of me playing with James Taylor, and I think, who else? Donovan. And I just look as though I've been doing the gardening. Or I've just been under a car trying to fix the oil leak. My clothing was terrible, but I was single at the time. You see, I didn't have the love of a good woman to tell me what I looked like. So they're my only regrets when I look at those very, very early clips. And I played one with Heather Small from M People. It was just me, her, and Jools. We did the song "Oh What a Perfect Day," and I've got this stripy T-shirt, like millions of stripes. And I'm sure it must have affected people's vertical hold on their TV. It must have, or given someone a fit. And I look back, I'm thinking, oh, why didn't I just wear a black shirt or a black T-shirt? So, yeah, I had no problem with the music and playing for all these famous people, but I had a distinct wardrobe malfunction issue.
Actually, playing with, it's literally like the creme de la creme of music consistently is your job, right? It's like the best job in the world. So have you ever been starstruck?
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. I think, because again, we never knew who we were going to get to play with. And I think if you went around everyone in the band and you asked them the same question, it would be really interesting, because you'd get very different answers, So our guitarist might say, when he was playing with B.B. King or playing with Jeff Beck or playing with Eric Clapton. And of course, I loved playing with those guys as well. It's an amazing experience. Yeah, as far as playing for heroes, 100%, I've definitely done that. And there's a couple, not many, so don't panic. I think it was all to do with the music I was listening to when I was a kid, when I was younger. And I really loved all those Black American funk bands like Earth, Wind and Fire and Kool and the Gang. And I also, loved people like Chaka Khan, Al Jarreau and George Benson. And those last three, I did get to play with them. I didn't get to play in Earth, Wind and Fire. When I was younger, the two bands I wanted to play in, I wanted to be I wanted to be in Weather Report and Earth, Wind and Fire. But I was 16 at the time, so I knew that was never going to happen, but that was it. But yeah, so I think the first one was Chaka Khan we got to play with on TV, and we did the songs I'm Every Woman and Ain't Nobody, I think we did. And I just was beside myself when I got that phone call. I just couldn't believe it. So yes, that was a sheer joy of that. And I didn't get a photograph. This was in the very early days, so I didn't feel comfortable about having a picture taken with them. But at least the videos exist. Actually, that was on Chris Evans' TV show called Don't Forget Your Toothbrush, which we were the house band on. In the mid-90s, it was a zany, wacky game show, but we played with a different guest each week, 2 songs. So that was a big thing. And we played with her again years later on Jools' own show. Then George Benson, we got to play with him on later. We did the song on Broadway. I think that's out there somewhere. And again, I got all of his albums, so I was a massive fan. I couldn't believe that I was working with this jazz legend. And then the other one was Al Jarreau, who's someone that still a lot of people are not aware of. But, if you don't know who Al Jarreau is, it's just quicker and easier to Google him. But he was very special for me, because when I was on the cruise ships, I used to put on his cassettes all the time. He was constantly playing Al Jarreau albums time and time, because it was such brilliant music, but it was very uplifting as well. It just made you feel good and very, very motivated. And amazing musicians on there. I think Abraham Laboriel played the bass on a lot of Al Jarreau stuff. So when I first met Al, he did the radio show first, and I came along to the studio with all my LPs, all my Al Jarreau LPs, and I said, "Please, would you sign these? Please." And he was fantastic. He personally, and not just signed them, he actually put little messages on each one. And I think there was one album from the early 80s, and he put to Dave, thanks for listening. He said, you do realise this has to be back in the museum before 5 o'clock today. Bless him, you know. And probably the most recent one was Paul Simon. Paul did the TV show, and I was always a big fan of his. So yeah, those are my big guns.
Amazing. So, like, what's a typical day in the studio like? You know.
Well, it depends. I mean, in the radio studio, it's a lot more. It's way more relaxed, because we used to do the radio show at Maida Vale BBC studios in North London. But then most of us lived in South London, including Jools at the time. So it was so much hassle to get over across town. So Jools convinced the BBC to come to his own studio here in South London, which is just 5 minutes from where I live. And so yeah, we used his studio, but the BBC engineers and BBC producers. And when we do the radio show, it's very relaxed, because we get some caterers in and they make lots of lovely food for us, and there's somebody making tea and coffee. There's some nice carpets on the floor in the studio. It's a very homely studio. And then when the artists... So yeah, what happens is the radio show, it's an hour. The first half an hour is just Jools in the rhythm section, just chatting, having a laugh, playing whatever we want to play. Then the guest arrives, and it's all pre-recorded, the radio shows. We try and, you know, when they're broadcast, it sounds live, but they're pre-recorded. So after half an hour, we stop. The guest comes in. We play a song with them, so we've got that out of the way, and then we start the show again. And the last half an hour is just about the guest, and then we just insert the song when the show is broadcast. So it's all sort of pieced together like that. But it's just that it's great, because everyone's just mostly sitting around waiting for the engineer to do something, or waiting for a cup of coffee to be made. So we get to sort of sit and chat with them. I remember when Jack Bruce, the bass player with Cream, came on the show, and funnily enough, I played trombone that day because Jack wanted to play bass. So I joined the horn section on trombone with my first instrument. But he was just talking about Jacko, he was talking about James Jamerson, and we just, you know, so there's a lot more time on the radio show recordings because it's a lot more laid back. The TV studio is a lot more hectic, because usually, you know, you'll have to get there round about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then straight away you're on the floor and you're running the song with just the musicians. And sometimes it just might be me, Jools, and an artist, or it might be the rhythm section. It's just different sizes. But more often than not, I'm involved in it, because they usually always need a bass player. So you just run the songs with you, the musicians, and then after however long, the artist will then appear. And then you'll run the song with them a few times. But then you'll keep doing it, because you've got all the camera crew that need to rehearse their moves. You need the sound engineers that need to get their sound right, the lighting guys. So, you know, you have to play through it quite a few times. And it's a lot less relaxed, because you're very aware that you're on this TV floor and everything's pointing at you, and it's very different from when you do the radio shows. So this goes on for however long, and then you stop and have a break. And then the show is usually recorded around about 8:30. So, you know, by this time you've had time to have dinner and get changed. And then you come back in, and then the show starts, and you just wait your turn for whoever you're playing with. But usually, yeah, if we're recording a show at 8:30, a TV show, we have to be there at like 4 o'clock. To start rehearsals. But obviously this is, you know, you're expected then to have the song all learned. You know, that's already a given. But this is just the run through with the artist. But sometimes the rehearsals start late and you don't get a lot of time. And, you know, I told you we had Smokey Robinson on the show, and it was just due to be him and Jools' rhythm section. And our guitarist couldn't make it, so Jools did get Eric Clapton in as the depth guitarist. I mean, if you're going to get anybody, you know, why not? Why not get Eric? So, but the thing is, we were running through the songs ourselves. Everything was going fine. I was sitting next to Eric, and we were having a nice chat, getting on very well because we'd worked together before. And then we got told by this BBC, I think the producer or the director said that you guys are not going to be able to rehearse with Smokey because he's not going to get here in time. I think his flight had got in late to London and he wanted to have a sleep or something. So he wasn't going to get to the studio until immediately before the broadcast.
Wow.
And I remember, I wasn't that surprised. I was a little surprised. I wasn't that surprised because it can be quite chaotic sometimes, that show. But Eric he couldn't believe the fact that we were going to be playing with Smokey and we weren't even going to say hi to him. We weren't even going to meet him until the moment we start playing. And I said, it is unusual, but what are you going to do? And that's what happened. The show started. We're all ready. We've learnt the song. Smokey walks out. He walks to the front, starts singing, and we did that Norah Jones. Well, the song that Norah Jones had a hit with, I think it's called "Don't Know Why." The song was, and he just starts to sing it, and we're playing it. And Eric does a solo in the middle of it, and the video. It's so funny because I'm sitting next to him, and when he's doing a solo, I've just got this biggest grin ever on my face because I'm sitting there thinking, it was perverse, the fact that we've not even said hello to Smokey yet. He's no rehearsal with him. This is it. So I was quite bemused about that. But I'm just sitting there he's singing and Eric's next to me doing this solo. I'm thinking, does life get any better than this? Mind you, that's before I got married and had a child. So
Yeah.
At the time, I thought to myself, this is pretty much as good as it gets. So that's an extreme example of where that was quite unusual. Normally we would always get to rehearse with the artist, but it is quite. And of course, we just did the Hootenanny with Jools. We just did the most recent one, and that was very odd because although we're still in this huge cavernous room at the BBC, there was no audience. There was no audience invited or otherwise. It was just us, the artist, and the cameramen running around. And that was very weird because there's just nothing then to bounce off. You haven't got any applause in the room or whatever. But at the same time, it was kind of quite relaxing as well. Because normally when you do that show, not only have you got the audience there, you've got the awareness that there's millions of people watching this on TV. But also you've got 5 or 6 other bands in the room that have all got bass players. So you're sitting there doing your best and you've got at least 5 or 6 other bass players sitting there kind of scrutinizing your every move, So it's quite a high pressure thing, and that's something that you just have to deal with. A lot of the stuff that I get to play on the show isn't that complicated. It's not always that difficult. A lot of the bass lines are fairly simple. But really, that's not what that gig's about. It's, you've got to play it well, you've got to play it authentically. But you've got to learn to deal with nerves. You've got to learn to deal with cameras coming up in your face, other things going wrong, technical issues, all sorts of things. And that takes a lot of, sort of inner work.
Yeah.
Really,
Well, I've watched all the Hootenannys. They're absolutely brilliant. But I've noticed something about the Hootenannys in particular is a lot of the audience members are really, really drunk. So you have a load of guests, and a lot of them are kind of well-known characters, and Jools goes over and talks to them, and they're all a bit drunk, and sometimes they get a bit carried away. The Hootenanny just seems like it's just a mad thing. So what's it like?
The Hootenanny show is disorganized chaos. It really is. Because what happens is when we do that show, we have a day of rehearsals with just the band on their own, which normally happens at Jools' studio. This time we had to do it at Maidstone, which is where it's filmed, because we needed a bigger studio to all socially distance. So we do a first day of rehearsal on our own. The second day of rehearsal is us with the artists. The third day of rehearsal is the artist that we didn't get to play with on the second day, and then we record the show. So there's not a lot of, I think, people think we rehearse for weeks or whatever, but it's literally a couple of days. And also, some people say, oh, it's recorded in June and it's recorded in August, and that's not true. It's still recorded, in late December. But there's just no way you could do a show like that live. It just wouldn't be possible. So it's usually it's close to Christmas, let's put it that way. But the thing with it is, when we have an audience there, you're right, you've got the general audience who have written in, and they've probably, entered some lottery or something like that to get on the show. But then you've got the invited celebrity audiences that Jools does like to chat with. Because it breaks it up, so it's not all just music. But in the early days, there was no alcohol on that floor, in the very early days of it, and rightly or wrongly they introduced beer and wine onto the tables. I think some people took more advantage of them than others, but I mean, for us it's weird because we just want to get on with it. We're so focused on the music. So when we're standing there and all this madness and drunken celebrities are running around, I mean, and we can't hear it either, because a lot of it is across the other side of the studio. So we have no idea. We can't hear the gags or anything that's being said. So we're kind of standing there kind of going, we just want to play the songs and do what we do. Yeah. But generally it's, and they try and do it in real time as well. So in other words, the only time they ever stop the show in the recording is something really, really bad has happened, and by that I mean a technical thing. There's been an electrical fault, something has stopped, something has crashed. If someone just plays a bum note, you can't really just put your hand up and say, no, can we go again, because there's a lot of people that have to reset. It's just not a done thing, So the key thing is not to play any bum notes, of course. But if some of the bands, if some of them are not happy with their performance, which does happen, what happens then is that we'll record the whole show in real time, and at the very end of it, if there's a bit of time left, some of the bands will re-record their songs. Mm-hmm. But we won't usually do it in the middle of the show, because they want that momentum of the show to carry on, But it's kind of, it's as amazing as it is. There's always a great sense of relief when it's over, because it is super high pressure for us, because we're playing with people sometimes that we've never played with before. We're playing songs that we've never played with before, and often we've only heard that song a few days before it, and yet you've got to play it authentically, accurately, as good as the people who played it on the recording. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of pressure. I mean, we did have one early Hootenanny, and we're playing for Ronnie Wood and Slash, and they're doing, I think, Little Queenie. And one of Jools' friends, who was a comedian, decided to sort of strip naked and streak across the TV screen. And it's out there on YouTube, because they showed it on the Best of the Hootenanny recently. His name was Malcolm Hardy. He used to run a comedy club here in Greenwich. And so sometimes we're all just standing there playing with these two icons, and there's just this fat naked bloke walking across the stage, and what are you going to do? You've got to, just get on with it, be professional.
It's brilliant. It makes for some great TV, great TV moments. The amount of just madness at the Hootenanny, it's great. Well, I've only got one more question for you, and my question is, what advice would you give to aspiring session musicians? Session bass players in particular.
Do it's a great question, and I always wish I had better answers for it, because it's tricky, really, because for someone of my age, I mean, I'm 57 now, so I started out, in 1981 or 82, and there really was a session scene at that time, and I'm talking about the very old-fashioned sense of the word. So in other words, radio jingles, TV adverts, movie soundtracks. That's kind of what I think about when I talk about sessions, because that's how I started out. And of course, a lot of that doesn't exist anymore, because a lot of it is done on computers and what have you. And I think the few players that still do that kind of work, it's a very small clique of people. And obviously they're very protective of that work, because it's very lucrative, the few people that do it. But I just kind of think that I'm not just being a session player, but just generally being a successful working musician. I think for me, it was definitely a big bonus playing both bass guitar and double bass. And that was advice from my trombone teacher to play both, because I wouldn't have got the work I've gotten if I didn't play both instruments. I wouldn't have got the Jools gig had I just been a bass guitarist. So for me, I think that's important to be versatile. And also it seems to be a lot of bass players are expected to play keyboards these days. A lot of bands want that, and BVs as well. I hear a lot of bass players who are musical directors. So he was me when I started out, thinking I'm playing double bass guitar. I thought I'm overqualified, and now I'm thinking, my goodness, I'm woefully underqualified. But, the key thing is, you have to be heard. People have to know what you can do. They have to hear you're playing. They have to, and it is more about that than let's say credentials. I think it's, and that's why I said before, for players to go and study with guys who are seasoned session players, because if you then go to them and even if it's just for a lesson, you're paying them money, but it's like an audition. They're getting to see. Because I would do it as well. If I had one of my pupils come up, and if I thought they were good enough and they were versatile, and also it's their personalities as well. If I thought they're not going to annoy people or cause a lot of trouble like that, I would be tempted to recommend them. But you can't unless you hear them play. You get to know them. You get to understand their personalities and stuff. So there's all of those things. And with me, I just took every gig that came along when I started out, every gig, every session, every jam session, because that was the only way to get around. Whereas obviously these days you can just put yourself on social media and you can put a video of you doing all these wonderful things, and a lot of people get to see it. The problem there is everyone's doing that. Or millions of people are doing it. So yeah, it's a great way to be seen by lots of people, but if you've got like a million other people doing exactly the same as you are, it's very difficult to stand out from that crowd, So, but yeah, when I moved to London, I just went to gigs, whether I was playing on them or just seeing them, and I just spoke to everyone, just got to meet people, And the key thing was just to be nice, just to be someone that people want to be around. Because I know people get booked. I know some musicians that get booked on their personalities more than their musicianship. If they're just nice to be around, they don't have to be the best player. But because if you're touring with someone as well, or you're in a studio with someone, you're going to be spending more time with them than playing music. You're going to be spending more time just chatting and having some food, whatever. The playing of the music is often the shortest thing. So you want to be someone who's got sort of good people skills. And that's just nice. People want to be around you, But yeah, it's trickier these days. Again, when I came to London, there was very few. There was a small group of double bass players and a small group of bass guitarists, and an even smaller group of guys that played both. So for me, moving to London, it was easy to get work because there was so much work and there was so few players. And I think now it's reversed, But yeah, there are certain rules that still apply. You still have to get out there, be seen, be heard, be nice. That's about it, really. And again, with session work, the guys that are doing it tend to be very protective of it. The few that have got them, and there's like there's like this queue of people that want to do it, and it's especially if you're coming from a different town like I did, you've got to get to the back of that queue. You can't be seen to be pushing in at the front saying, give us some gigs, give us some work, because a lot of these guys have spent the last 40 years accumulating this and building a reputation, So it's tricky, but again, just the skills that you need. I think personally, being able to read is definitely beneficial. I wouldn't say it's out and out, you've got to do it or forget it. Because I think these days in sessions, more often than not, you don't get given a written bass part. You might get given a chord chart, or you'll just listen to the track. So then again, sometimes being able to read really well it's not always that important. I would still encourage people to do it, but I think it's more important to have amazing ears. I think more often than not, you're going to get called to do a lot more stuff where you need to have great ears and have a good repertoire as well. You know, you just need to know, you know, loads of, if you want to do like function gigs, and I think it's quite lucrative. A lot of function work is very lucrative, but then you need a load of dance tunes, a lot of sort of, you know, old-fashioned dance things. You need to know loads of pop stuff, funk stuff, rock stuff. You know, it's a lot of things to have in your head, but it's part of it. You need to have a good repertoire to call on. So, but yeah, you just got to be tenacious as well. You have to be patient. You know, sometimes things take time, and again and also, I have to say, but luck can come into it. It's not what it's all about, but it can be part of it. It's when I moved to London, I pretty much always lived in southeast London, which is where Jools was, and where the studio was, and where a lot of the band were. If I'd have moved to London and ended up in northeast, northwest, southwest, there's every chance I wouldn't have got that gig, because I wouldn't have been playing with those guys. So, but that's tricky, because that's out of your control. That's one of those things. But that's why I'm a big fan of the saying, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Right.
It's a bit like, you know, if you want to win the lottery, you know, you've got to buy a ticket. There's no way you're going to win it. You know? You've got to be, and it's the same
to win it.
Music. You know, you've got to be active. You've got to be always actively pursuing it in one way or another, and then hopefully something will happen. But if you're just not out there doing it, if you're not putting the time and whatever, you know, then nothing comes from nothing, as they're saying. So yeah, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I like that. Nice one,
Dave. Well, thanks very much for joining me today.
My pleasure. I loved it. Thanks for having me.